We've got a quorum though. We'll move forward. Okay, it looks like we are live. So I will open the meeting.
Hold on one second.
Okay.
It's YouTube is still loading it. I have to start recording it too.
Thank you.
Yeah, hold on one second. Okay. There we go. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So I'm opening the Common Council Ordinance Committee regular meeting today, January 17th, 2023, and it is 7:02. And I'll just note the members who are in attendance. Ed Camacho is here. David Hooverman is here. Tom Livingston is here. Nora Najewski-Eitner is here, as am I, Lisa Shanahan, the chair. So we've done the roll call, and I guess I will open public comment as we have no public hearings today. Is there anybody in the queue, Brian?
So there is somebody listed as an attendee. It says that there's one person here. Oh, there you go. I didn't see Diane for a second. She's raising her hand, so I'm going to allow her to talk.
Okay, and I'm going to note that Josh Goldstein will be joining the meeting momentarily.
All right, Diane, you can unmute yourself. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. And Brian, Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
I just wanted to let you know, Chairwoman Shanahan, that it was a little tough getting into the session. So it took me like 3 minutes. So you might want to, after I speak, if there might be others that join you. Anyway, tonight, I wanted to speak on 2 items on your agenda. The first, and more briefly, is under new business, the cultural district. I think that's a terrific idea. I do note, and I helped and weighed in on the POCD review or update, chapter 6. The thing that I'm not sure of is why we would need another commission. Why could not this cultural district be a subcommittee of the art commission? For a lot of different reasons, I think we want to streamline when possible. I know Mr. Livingston has been a big promoter of streamlining, but the thing is, the statute might as long as there's a separate entity that, and I think should include citizens, I think maybe just have it as a subset of your Arts Commission. My main comments tonight relate to Chapter 55 and the demo delay. In the past and even now, I do environmental site assessments. So I work with a lot of forms, and part of the environmental site assessment process is to go to local files, local towns, and look at do file research out the wazoo. And because of that, I always am a proponent of user-friendly processes. I do think that a lot of what seemed to have been missed and the reason for the problem that brought on this new update, and I do applaud the Ordinance Committee and Mr. Livingston, Todd Bryant, and others that have helped with this project, that we do need, of course, to fill in the gaps. But an additional way to do so is to look at the form and make sure it is user-friendly. And instead of having a separate form for historic preservation, possibly just have a different part or section of the demolition delay form. And maybe that is the case here. But I do think we should make it user-friendly. I wanted to make sure that we might also note, and this has more to do with, while we're at it, make the applicant kind of let us know if that building is over 50 years, let's put more of the onus on them and assume that there is historic preservation. In the case of lead paint, if the building is older than 1978, and I have had a license for lead abatement, let's assume these things and make the applicant prove to us that it is not the case. In addition to the city supporting with either lists or overlays some of these items for asbestos, underground tanks, cistern, septic. In Part B, I ask that you train all the related departments and the sign-offs. And one thing that I'd like to add that I think will help in any missing of important buildings is you can flag on the tax assessor the tax assessor books. There are title searchers that go through, and you could flag once you determine buildings that do have historic significance. You can flag it on the tax assessor books like they do, and they're supposed to do with certain toxic dump sites or contaminated properties. I know that they don't do it yet in the city of Norwalk. It's something I'm going to suggest. Lastly, under 55-7, under exceptions, number 1, I get a little nervous when it's left to judgment as to what the chief building official may say is unsafe, because to a preservationist, things that might look unsafe may not really be unsafe if they can be preserved. And I do know that our wonderful chief building official eventually will retire. Chief Ireland is amazing, but we don't want to leave it up to their judgment. And I know, and I must confess, I am not a student of the state statute that talks about a definition of unsafe. If this committee could add any language to further clarify unsafe, historic unsafe structures, I think that would help us no longer leave it up to the judgment of people that may not have the background. So I thank you very much for hearing me, and good luck in this particular exceptional effort. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Diane.
Ms. Lorcello. Are there anybody
Lisa,
else?
just quickly, while Diane was talking, I think Josh popped in at either 7:02 or 7:03, so he's been here.
That's what I was going to know too. I wrote 7:04, but I'm good with 7:03.
Yep. We have one other attendee, Nicole Eady. Nicole, if you'd like to speak, raise your hand now.
And then we can move Ms. Lorcello back to attendees.
Yep.
No more hands up.
Oh, wait a minute. No, Nicole has not raised her hand.
Okay, great. Does any other committee member have a comment from the constituents that they need to share in the record? Seeing none, then I'm going to close public comment, and I would accept a motion to accept the minutes of November 15th, 2022. Thank you, Mr. Livingston. I have a couple of changes. I don't know if other people do. I'm going to go through them quickly as I've shared them with Brian so he can put them in. Mr. Kevin Tepass lives on Barnfield Road. That's on page 3, paragraph 3. On page 4, paragraph 7, Louise Washer works at Norwalk River Watershed Association. And then my last changes are on page 5 in the second paragraph, last 2 sentences. However, gas blowers require $50 a week in gasoline. The next sentence should read, while the overall cost may be a wash, using electric blowers leave the area cleaner. The next paragraph, and Nora, I believe this relates to you, and I'm just making sure that it's right. Ms. Najewski-Eitner asked Mr. Kotelik if there were any programs, so I added his name in just for clarification. And then in the last paragraph, last sentence, Ms. Shanahan noticed that the focus of the presentation suggested that the best gardening practice was to leave the leaves in place.
You also had in the paragraph with Nora at the back of it, at the end, Nora said there have been discussion about 0% loans through Kiva.
Oh, yes. Thank you for picking that up. Yes, that was the other change I wanted to make.
That's what I had my hand up to say. I was like, let's get the advertising in for our really amazing program. So
yes, we got that in, and I just didn't make a proper note on my notes. So great. Anything else from any other members? Mr. Livingston.
Yeah, just really minor nits on the top of page 6, the first line of the first paragraph. Mr. Livingston suggested that Mr. Todd Bryant, by the way, it's 1D, of the Norwalk Preservation Trust present. So make it, the most important thing is Norwalk Preservation Trust.
Right.
But deleting the word to. That's it.
We'll get rid of that extra D while we're at
Yeah,
it.
Todd will appreciate that.
So great.
It's been removed on the first page as well, Tom, under others on the first page.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yep.
Great.
And I'm just going to put down also, Tom, it said Todd Bryant with 2 Ds, so I removed that, and it says Preservation Trust. So I'm just going to put Norwalk Preservation
Right.
Trust.
That's what I want to do. Right.
Yep.
Great. So with the motion being on the floor, all in favor of accepting the minutes as modified, please raise their hand. Any abstentions? Mr. Camacho? And otherwise, we have 5-4 and one abstaining. So the next item on the agenda is discuss and vote on chapter 55, which is the demolition delay ordinance, and Mr. Livingston's going to take the laboring oar on this.
Yeah, thank you. We talked about this last time, and let me just go over the background for those who may be listening, and also Mr. Camacho. So this has been in the works a while. It was brought to the fore and got a lot of attention with the recent demolition at Willow Street, but it's not new. This ordinance has been around a long time. We were amending it. And I just want to remind people a little bit, step back a little bit about historic preservation, a little bit in the city, and Todd can jump in and correct me, but the POCD has an entire chapter devoted to preserving and protecting and promoting our historic heritage. And among other things, it says that the city needs to be more proactive in its preservation. It notes the value of preservation in economic terms and also encouraging tourism. But one of the goals outlined in the POCD is, and I'll quote, Norwalk protects its most important historic resources and encourages adaptive reuse of historic sites to maintain and enrich the city's character. That's one of the goals. One of the strategies proposed to achieve this goal is to, again, quote, require advisory comment from the Historic Commission to the relevant city agency prior to approval of any project that will affect a building or group of buildings 50 years old or older. So that's really the background to the POCD. So it's, basically part of our master plan for the city. And just to go over the changes to the ordinance from what exists now, again, we went over these last time, but I'll just highlight them again. I'll go over the major ones here. The change is from the current 120-day delay in our current ordinance to 180, which, by the way, is the same as Stamford and Westport. We've added a definition of demolition to make it more clear what we're talking about. We carved out of that definition ordinary maintenance and repair. In the latest draft, we've added a definition of historic property. That's from state law to make sure we cover anything that might otherwise fall through the cracks. We have streamlined the application procedure a little bit and made it more clear. We've removed the requirement and expense that an applicant file a notice in the publication in the newspaper, but we do require them instead to give notice to property owners across the street. We've added a provision that the sole basis of objection is that the building to be demolished is not architecturally or historically significant. The reason for that is we don't want people, just because they don't having a feud with their neighbors, to say you can't do it. So we want it to be really focused on what we're really trying to accomplish here. We also allow the party objecting to withdraw objection, which would have seemed obvious, but it wasn't in the last ordinance. We have added a provision about prohibiting demolition by neglect. So if somebody just lets a building sit there and let it fall apart during the demolition delay period, kind of defeats the purpose of the ordinance. And we provide an exception for lifting of a house that comply with FEMA, or if any structure determined by the health director to be a threat to public health. And finally, we've increased the fines. Not as much as we would have liked. You'll see that's one of the bigger changes here. Attorney Candela went back and did a lot of research on this. And unfortunately, given the current state of state law, this is the most we can do. We would have liked to have prohibited people from doing work or have more significant fines, but it's just not possible this time. So that's the gist of this. I will note, because it's come up, how big a deal is this, right? I spoke to Bill Ireland, and he gave me reports for the last 4 fiscal years, fiscal 19 to 22. During that time period, there were 136 permits applied for and only 3 delays, all of them last year, by the way. Of those 3 delays, 2 were withdrawn, one of which was by Mr. Milligan, by the way. And the third, the applicant waited the waiting period and tore a building down. So this did not stop anybody from doing the work they wanted to do. What it did do and does do is to bring attention to these buildings so that the Historical Commission can look at them. It has not proven to be cause any sort of real delay for people. And I think it's worth moving on to public hearing. So I do have, by the way, I have a couple little nits on it. I can get to now or later. I don't know, Lisa, you want me to just give them out?
Oh, yeah, why don't we get that out of the way and then we'll take comments from other
Okay,
committees.
just on 55-4, there's just.
Hold on one second, Tom.
I'm sorry?
Let me put it up for everyone. I'm just going to share the screen. 55-4.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We need to take out the word. Oh, you did. You, Brian, you do have this here. Okay, you did make the change.
Yep.
Okay, and C, after C, we at their historic property, or just add a comma. That's very minor, obviously. More substantively, on page, the next page on 55-5, A8, language in brackets that says that, it's the point I made about notifying your neighbors.
Yeah.
And we're notifying the neighbors across the street. The language there was in brackets, and we have spoken with Brian Baker at Planning and Zoning, and what I'd like to propose, subject to further review by them, but that the language be revised to read, this is some paragraph 8, the names and addresses of the owners of the properties that abut or are directly across the street from the building. So deleting the word adjoining and immediately adjacent and replacing it with that abut or are directly across the street from the building. And I would also do that in B2, which is the same situation.
From the names and addresses of the owners of all properties that abut or are directly across from the building.
Across the street from the building.
Across the streets.
Street, that's what's in the, that's what brought.
And then we're deleting adjoining and immediately adjacent.
Right.
And then we got to get rid of our street from the building, structure, or part thereof to be demolished.
Yeah, that stays.
Right. So I got to get rid of from the building though, because we have that twice.
Great.
Okay. And you said you want that in B2?
You have it twice? I can't read this here.
No, because he typed in from the building twice.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
All
And
right.
then
So
you
we
do
want,
it B2.
yep. All right. Mail copies of a notice of intent to demolish to the owners of all properties
That abut
that abut
or are directly across the street from.
or are directly across the streets
I can't read this, Brian. I don't know how you can read it.
I know, it's very small.
from the building.
Right.
Where it says, so this says, we can get rid of adjoining and immediately across the street.
Yeah,
And
it's
so
the
do you
same
want
thing as
from the
above,
building
yeah.
or from the property on which the building structure or
Well,
part thereof is to be demolished?
It should read deliberate copies of a notice of intent to demolish the notice to the owners of all properties that abut or are directly across the street from the property on which the building's blah, 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 blah.
Okay, so we'll get rid of from, oh yeah, got it.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. And then going down a little bit to 3, I guess it's the 4th line in 3. Such signs shall include a copy. All right. And then finally, on 55-8, there's some language that inadvertently was removed. I'd like to add it back at the beginning.
Sure.
This was in the old version, the current ordinance that reads, in addition to other penalties and remedies provided by law, comma, and go on from there. And again, this is from the current ordinance and will give us additional remedies if such remedies exist now, in the future that we don't know about.
So Tom, just one more time, in addition to other penalties or remedies
Provided by law.
provided by law, thank you. Any person who, okay, and then it goes on.
Yeah,
All
and
right.
that's it.
Okay, so
Tom,
is that, those are all the changes we want to make to the
That I
ordinance as
proposed, right. Others may have others.
we received it in our notice.
Right.
Tom, you're kind of cut. Okay, so now I'm opening it to questions. Do you have a question, Mr. Goldstein?
yeah,
Questions? Or
very small question. Tom, do you think in under 55A8, sorry, there needs to be a right to, right of appeal sort of thing here, or is because it's administrative, it doesn't need to I'm thinking about how we've done in ordinances. If someone disagrees or whatever, they can seek redress in the Superior Court. But I don't know if that's necessary here or not.
It's not in our current ordinance, and I have not seen it in any other ordinance like this. Mr.
I just circled it. I didn't know if it's something we actually need or not.
Todd, have you ever seen that?
No, because if you're talking about the age of the house, when the house was built, and that's what triggers everything, that's really not appealable. I mean, it was either built in 1820 or it wasn't.
I was saying the oh, okay. I guess what I was trying to say was if someone violates the ordinance or okay, I'm going to walk this back.
All right, sorry,
Okay.
I didn't understand that. But
I've got,
Further comments on the violations before we get to Nora's questions, violations, fines, or other lapses of permit?
because I have a question specifically about that. It's separate from my larger questions.
Okay, let's go back to that just while we're focused on it, and then we'll go to your larger question.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, or if other people have smaller stuff too. So the fine is $250 per day, with each day of such violation constituting a separate violation. What is the end point of the violation?
I assume it'd be 120 days. Or we
So
can't
if
stop them.
someone were to
180,
demolish without a permit, then it's 120 days.
180 days if this
80.
goes through.
Okay. Is that clear in this, that would be the duration of the violation?
Actually, Nora, that's a really good point. Let me take that back a little bit. Let me look at this again.
$45,000.
I mean, it might be, I have to think, Brian, maybe you have a thought on this. Is it an ongoing violation if they've never comply?
Yes. There has to be, there has to be some action by the violating party to try and remedy the situation to the satisfaction of the city. So, for example, if a historic building is demolished, the fines start. And then there has to be some remediation. Obviously, the historic building can't be put back together the way it was, but perhaps there could be some agreement about how that building, how the future construction can be used to the satisfaction of the city to honor the prior building that was destroyed. That's something that just popped off my head while we were talking about it. So. There could be situations where it could stop at a certain point, and there could be other ones where the fines continue to accumulate until there's some, satisfactory resolution as it is agreed upon by the city, who's the person that's administering the fine, because this violation is about, in this particular circumstance, this violation is about somebody who didn't pull a permit and then demolished a building. That's one of the things. It's not about whether you have a license or not. That's a totally separate thing. There are situations where you don't need a license, but you need a permit. There could be where you need both, but in one situation you could have both, or you could have don't need a license, but you need a permit. So it could be, there could be that situation as well. That's something that just popped in my head. So there could be an endpoint, and there might not be until the person tries to rectify the situation to the satisfaction of the city.
but what's the enforcement mechanism? Is it a court proceeding, or like how does that work?
The $250 fine, we probably have to institute an action in the Superior Court, I guess, similar to what we do with blight and things of that nature. Is
that clear in the ordinance as well, or should that be?
Something we could certainly look at about whether we have to put in there that that the city would. I could take a look at what other ordinances do, specifically blight, to see whether we have that kind of language in there that we're going to effectuate some kind of litigation in the Superior Court to try and collect on the judgment, or are we just putting a judgment lien on the property? I'll look into that further, Ed.
Okay. I do have some other questions.
Also, the idea of whether there's an end date, whether the 180 is a firm date or whether it can spool out beyond the 180.
In some jurisdictions, particularly in New York State, where there are these kinds of fines, they go on indefinitely. And it really is up to the court and the city attorney to work out some sort of a deal so that they don't end up paying $1 million or have to pay $1 million or $500,000. You work out some sort of deal, like in some ways with what Brian was saying, that that it goes until you work it out. It becomes a little unwieldy after a while, but technically, you don't want someone to figure out that maybe the cost of demolishing it is cheaper than the cost of complying.
Right.
So
That's the big fear, right? So
Yeah,
the
that makes
longer it
good
goes out, the
sense.
better.
That makes good sense. I see Lisa and Mark's hands up, but I'm going to continue, complete this discussion with the lawyers about this
Sure.
section. If you'll be patient with us. Ed, do you have something more to say on that?
the language of directly across the street, what does that mean? Does that mean the house right in front of you or on either side?
Yes.
That mean exactly.
No, I wanted to ask this question. It's a great question.
So that's what we were looking at. That's what Brian Baker gave us today. And as I said, when I mentioned it, we're going to have them review this again, whether it should be that, which is what we currently have in our zoning ordinances, or should it be like 100 feet or something like that.
Yeah.
So
Or remove the word directly and just say across the street. Or
Right.
something, depending on how long the street is. But and
right,
the
that's
other,
why, yeah.
And the other question I have is demolition by neglect. Are we compelling people to keep their houses for 180 days to keep them upright? And how are we going to enforce that? If the thing is if it's going to fall down in 180 days, it's going to fall down. Can we compel a landowner or a property owner to keep something upright?
Well, what we don't want to have happen is for the demolition delay ordinance to be in effect and they're just purposely let it fall apart, so nothing can be done to save it.
But
If it's a safety hazard, then the building inspector will tell us that. And it's
then it runs into the blight ordinance, right? Because you're basically compelling people to maintain property, which is a little bit different. Which is a little. I mean, I'm not sure how that works with blight, but it becomes a little problematic.
How so?
Because you're compelled. Because if a house is going to fall down in 180 days, are you really asking property owners to do what it takes to keep it from falling down until the city decides if they're going to give a permit or not?
I mean, again, if it's going to fall down, it's a safety hazard, right?
Right, but no one lives. Let's say no one lives there, or so it's the sound. It's the sound of a tree falling in the woods, right? It's like, okay, so it falls. As long as it's not going to be a threat to people like on the sidewalk.
I guess my only concern would be if the property is, falling apart like that and it is a safety issue. I mean, just for example, there could be, wires coming from the street attached to the house that give it power. If the house falls down, then there could be a wire that's, ripped off the house, falling down, laying in the property. There could be people that walk over. I mean, it could be a safety issue, not so much from the property falling down, but it could be, like a live wire could be torn down because of it.
What if they detach the power supply and just let the house fall down? I mean, the point is, are we really requiring them to keep something up that really is falling?
But excuse me, if it's falling down, again, if it's really falling down, it's a safety hazard, so it's exempt from this, right? So that's not an issue here. What we're trying to do is we don't want people to, say, take the Willow House, just assuming that the demolition delay was in there and assuming it was on the register, went to the state, or pick a house that was on the historic register, and we're waiting for the state to get involved or whatever it may be. And these guys, knowing that's happening, start taking the building apart.
Well, that's different, but that's not by neglect.
Well, that's the intent of this, is to stop them from doing that.
All right, but that's not by neglect, though. That's by intent at that point.
But this is an overlap between blight and this. I mean, this is really focused in on historic houses, and this house would have to be somehow recognized as historic, right? So are we?
Well, it's anything.
Are we just meshing two things that don't necessarily overlap very often?
Well, I'm not sure that a house that falls down by neglect in 180 days, that is. I mean, I suppose that it's going to, if the house is going to fall, it's going to fall in a day. But I'm just not the concern. The issue I have is demolition by neglect. I mean, if the application is in and if it's not acted on and the thing falls down before it's acted on, is that by neglect?
Well, I try to think how to. Todd, do you want to, we talked about this earlier and you propose this type of language. Do you want to comment on your experience with this and your concerns?
Yeah, for the most part, the houses that if somebody's going to apply for a demolition permit, they're not going to apply. I mean, it's first of all, there's a couple of weeks. What is it? 2 weeks, 3 weeks before the delay can be. There's a 2-week waiting period generally before the delay is applied, and in that period of time, the people in the historic community will typically go and look at the house, talk to the owner, try to avoid this whole process altogether by coming to some agreement before the delay is put on. By the time you put the delay on, then it's kind of all out war, and you're trying to figure out a way to, fix that somehow. Fortunately, this particular variant of the age of the ordinance allows for whoever it is that put on the delay to withdraw it, which gives the historic community and the owner a lot more flexibility about how, what happens in that 180 days. So, like Tom says, if it's going to fall down, Bill Ireland or whoever the chief building official is going to see that, and they're going to declare it unsafe. If it has been made to fall down by the owner, then you have a blight issue. Or demolition by neglect, take your pick.
So it does run into the blight issue, into the blight question.
Well, and demolition by neglect, which I think is also addressed here, which is important because that's that can be an issue. But in general, this ordinance addresses, if not all, then certainly most of the points that the State Historic Preservation Office and Preservation Connecticut think are important in this kind of issue.
We also want to make sure that at least, demolition by neglect, I think it's a very small subset where, blight can be a lot of things. It could be this, but it could be a lot of other things as well. And demolition by neglect also talks about, we're talking about 29-408 of the general statutes under the state building code, which talks about that if you are going to demolish a property, there has to be a fence up, there has to be certain safety precautions in there. So it's just another layer to make sure that people aren't demolishing a property unsafely. I understand Ed's concern. I will take a look at blight again and double check and compare the two and get back to everybody. But I think obviously blight is the top of the funnel, and demolition by neglect would be the bottom. And again, if somebody were to do that, if that were to happen, if the building is falling apart like that, then the health department's probably going to come in and tell them that it has to come down anyway. So it's probably just a situation where somebody who doesn't want to demolish it by neglect and they're being told you just need to keep it up a little bit more is going to be focused on doing that. It's almost like a reminder. But yeah, I think there could be an overlap with blight, and I'll take a look at that issue.
Yeah, and let me just point out, just from the language here, is not a broad. It's not all that broad. What it says is the property owner shall secure and maintain such building structure, blah, blah, in a manner that minimizes the risk of water penetration, vandalism, fire, or other significant damage, and otherwise complies with section 29-408, which I believe is the state building code. So it's not, it's not really broad. It's you just have to maintain the building, you have to keep it watertight. That's what it's saying. And just make sure it doesn't, try what it says, significant damage. It's not the same as a blight. It's maintaining it so it doesn't just sit there.
And it's a big step forward because I remember, years ago when you would put on a demolition delay, and these guys would go in and start taking the building apart anyway, and claim it was remediation, and which makes the whole thing a moot point. But this ordinance will fix that.
And by the way, it does say in this section that partial demolition is prohibited except to the extent required by law, maybe there's a health issue or safety issue, or permitted by the chief building officer. So they just have to talk to the chief building officer. It's not, I don't think it's so there.
Okay.
Do you have other questions on that? Satisfied right now, Ed, to move
Yeah,
forward?
I don't have the thing in front of me. Unfortunately, I didn't download the packet, but so I apologize for that, but that makes sense.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask Lisa and Mark to make their comments. And then
Nora had comments, I think.
Oh, I thought Nora wanted to have a bigger overall, but Lisa and Mark, are you talking about the items that we're talking about? Okay, so why don't we hear from each of you, and then Nora will take the bigger concerns that you have next, if you don't mind. All right, Lisa, why don't you go first, and then we'll listen to Mark, and then we'll move to Nora.
Okay, I'm Lisa Wilson Grant. I'm on the Historic Commission, and I was one of the first citizens on the scene with the Willow House catastrophe, and alerted the media and everything about it. I'm concerned that this might be off topic right now, but that we're going a little bit narrow and deep on just demolition itself. I believe the ordinance or a different ordinance needs to be expanded to include renovation and remodeling, so that in this particular case, they weren't even part of the demolition process. They went with a remodel or renovation permit. And I think that should trigger the historic community's involvement as well with a sensitive historic house, that this type of thing doesn't always happen, but it could happen. And in this case, it did. And then maybe there should be more visits by the building department or some other body that oversees renovations, particularly with a sensitive historic house.
Thank you.
So I just quickly, does any, like, the definition of demolition is very broad, and it's talking about not only the exterior, but it also talks about, so it does say it shall not be construed to prevent the ordinary maintenance or repair of any building. Do we know do we know, Lisa, what the renovation permit looks like? Should it be, I guess the question is, should it be attached to a demolition permit so that everyone gets to see it, or is it,
Hey,
I'm
Brian,
familiar with that?
Brian, if I could.
We don't know we don't ever get notice of any renovation. It's always just at the demolition or intent to demolish phase.
If I could, this ordinance is clearly drafted for exterior only, because it's just not workable to try and, to know about interior work. We talked about that. It's just not going to be something we can do.
Even with a sensitive historic house.
Maybe down the road when we develop this historic inventory, maybe then we can figure it out. But right now, I don't think we have the ability to do that.
Yeah, because that's what happened in this case. I mean, they weren't even part of the process. And while, I'm following along with the rest of it, and it all seems like good maneuvers with the language for demolition, I'm worried about this happening again and someone blatantly disregarding the process.
Thank you for your comment on that. We'll take that into account as Mr. Livingston said. Mark, if you would make your comment, and Todd will finish up with you.
Dana's also got her hand raised too.
Mark Jackson, with the Historic Commission also. I had a quick question in regards to no longer putting the demo notice in the papers. If we're moving away from doing that, can we just post it on the Norwalk website? This way, if someone goes on the building department, it's posted there also. Is that something, we talk about streamlining,
Right.
Why don't we just post it online as well, in addition to notifying the neighbors?
Well, it is, the ordinance requires that it be filed with the Historical Commission and the Director of P&Z and any other individual or company that's asked for these notices. So I
Right, but you know, like when they put the sign up in the front yard, people don't always, I mean, or in the newspaper, if you don't get the newspaper, you would never know it was there. But at least if people are online and it's been made aware, it's just another area that it's listed. That's all I'm saying. And then I had another thing, but I forgot what it was. I'll just raise my hand if I remember what it is.
Great. Mr. Bryant?
Thank you. And I totally understand Lisa's concern. And it may be that the building department or when they get a major renovation like this was, that they should, for what was clearly a historic house, and I don't know how you codify this, that it passes by the historical commission. Now, the unfortunate part, you know, the thing that might work against that is that even in a local historic district, which is the most powerful of all historic designations, in terms of regulating changes to a building, they cannot regulate the exterior of a building, or the interior of a building, sorry. It's only what can be seen from a public way. But that said, this isn't a local historic district that we're talking about. So there might be some mechanism somewhere in the building department and that can connect the building department and the historical commission when it's a major renovation of a historic house. God knows how. I mean, there's a lot of that's a real minefield, I understand.
I think it might be beyond the scope of where we are with this ordinance.
Absolutely. With this, yeah.
So let's, I want to be respectful of people's time. So
no, I just wanted to respond to that, and also to say I think it's a good idea to post it on the website. I had something else to say, but like Mark, I forgot it by now. So
you can get back to us, Ms. Laird, and we're going to go to Nora with the larger concern that she might have.
Dana, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you.
I think Tom mentioned that a lot of problems in Norwalk is the land is worth more than the structure. I mean, it could be the Taj Mahal, but if it's on the water, people just see the land and not the building. That's just one point. I'm wondering if we could if you put in one more definition between blight and demolition by neglect, if something by demolition by intentional neglect is something that's happening. And the other thing is things that are in danger of something in imminent collapse might be something that could be a term to be used here as a danger. And that, of course, we might have people making things want to imminently collapse, but that's all the points I think I have now. Yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dana.
All right, Nora, here you go. Where are you? There you are. You've moved around on my screen.
Sorry. And look, I'm sensitive to time constraints, but I raised this the last time. I've talked to several people about it. I'm just going to reiterate, from my perspective, a couple of different things. First, I just fundamentally think 50 years is far too recent. It sweeps in far too many houses in Norwalk, and really realistically, the chances that a house 50 years old is going to be considered to be architecturally or historically significant, that's probably a very small number of houses. As I've talked to Mr. Bryant about, most of them are probably located in a couple of select neighborhoods that already have designation. And I think realistically, given what we know about building standards in the post-war era and the sort of boom in poorly constructed houses during that time, the boom in houses that were built as beach houses or otherwise sort of not year-round that were then converted, I really don't see any reason to be expending a lot of energy focused on preserving houses that are 50 to 60 to 70 years old. I certainly understand the very different concerns associated with houses that are significantly older. And I would personally much prefer to see this ordinance directed at houses that are much more likely to have actual historical significance, to be architecturally unique, to have features that, can tie to the area's history, that are more likely to have, more solid construction just on the basis of sort of how they were initially built. Further, and this is, I think, again, more fundamentally and philosophically, I am just generally concerned about ordinances that pass every applicant through a time-consuming, and I get it's only a couple-week delay, but it is a delay. And it is a delay that consumes staff time, it consumes historic commission time. Every house over 50 years old has to go through this process. So you're looking at, as we heard, 136 applications, which consume staff time, which consumed historic commission time, only 3 of which were ever flagged, and only 1 of which was actually put through the delay process. What that says to me is this regulation, or this ordinance as it currently exists, is sweeping in primarily properties that are not likely to be subject to this kind of protection. So to my mind, we're approaching this problem backwards then. We are consuming time, we're adding delay without actually really focusing on what we're trying to preserve. So I'm a big fan of the registry project. To my mind, that is the way to go. I would simply remove any building that does not make it onto the inventory. I know it's on a registry. From my perspective, I would strike 55(4)(a) and (c) and can maintain only those buildings that are listed on the resources inventory. Because quite frankly, if they don't have criteria that get them onto the inventory, the odds that the Historic Commission is then going to vote to put in a delay seems unlikely to me. And again, I'll also raise the issue that I recognize that the delay is intended to hope to find ways of, preserving the property, of negotiating. I also think in practice that we have seen that, there are not necessarily a lot of resources available to save every home. And a better approach would be really focusing our time and energy on how we preserve those homes that are most special, most unique, have the most to offer, how we work with residents who happen to own or be invested in those particular homes. That's a better use from my perspective of staff time, of historic commission time, and really would target the actual problem we're attempting to get at, as opposed to sort of this, throw a wide net kind of approach. So that's my sort of fundamental set of concerns here. And I understand that, in that sense, some of this stuff has already been in the ordinance and there's not the changes on the table, but, this is the opportunity from my perspective to really think again, what are we trying to accomplish here? Is this ordinance actually trying to accomplish our goals? Is it doing so in the way that is most streamlined, most respectful of our residents, most respectful of our staff time? And again, gets to ultimately our fundamental goal in the city, which is to increase our affordable housing, to make it more affordable for people to live here. Every barrier we put up to folks to try to do renovations that support safety, that support livability, that make the city affordable, that are our opportunity to think about, are we offering the best housing units for the needs of our city at this moment in time? So for all those reasons, this is not the approach that I would take to this ordinance. And I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of share my thoughts on that. And I appreciated the conversations I've had with several folks about this. And I very much get the balancing of values here. But to my mind, it simply weighs on for a much more targeted approach to really try to achieve what we're actually after. So thank you, Lisa. I appreciate the opportunity to express that.
You've got it. So Mr. Livingston or Mr. Bryant, would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say a couple of things and I think Brian can talk more about the 50 years. So first of all, I don't see this as a conflict between affordable housing, but that's a separate discussion. We are working on developing and expanding the inventory, the historic inventory. That's not going to happen overnight. That is in the works, I think, and talking way on this too. I think that's a couple of years down the road. It is something that we think we've secured funds for. Hopefully, I think redevelopment is going to put forward some money to do this. And maybe there's some grants. I know there's some grants available too. So we are definitely working on that, which will clearly make it easier, but we are where we are today. And we have an ordinance today. I think Well, let me stop there. Maybe Todd can explain why 50 years was the date selected and how that came to be, because it's not just a Norwalk thing. As I mentioned, it's not just even our POCD. It is a national standard. But Todd, why don't you talk about it?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Yeah, I mean, the 50-year standard was created for the National Register of Historic Places. It was meant to be a moving target. And it was meant to be a baseline at which you where you started to look at a building. And clearly not every 50-year-old house is significant. Architecturally, historically, I mean, a very small number of them are. But on the other hand, you don't know that until you start looking at them. I mean, it could be that, there's a spectacular mid-century modern house that was built 50 years ago by a significant architect. We don't know that. And if somebody, came to, I mean, Nora, your neighbor's house, was older than 50 years, but the Edgar Taffel, that guy was the on-site architect for Falling Water.
Mhm.
I mean, there are things like that. And also when you start to put everything on a list, lists are imperfect and they need to be maintained. So, it's going to take a long time. Things are going to be missed. So, and then somebody's got to maintain it. Somebody's got to look at that list every year or every 2 years, whatever it is, see what's burned down, what's now eligible, whatever it is. I mean, that's a whole other thing. If you talk about staff time, that adds another level of what the staff is going to have to do. They're going to have to maintain this list.
I just want to note, by the way, and Nora, you did mention this. I mean, it has not been a significant burden on staff time based on my discussions with Bill Ireland. As I said, 136 in the last 4 years, none. Well, the 3 that were there were all last year. It hasn't been a burden. He doesn't view it as a burden to the people applying either, because it's right at the beginning of the process when not much is happening anyway. But so I don't think it is. I think on balance, we are not imposing a significant burden on individuals, but yet working to preserve and promote our historic heritage in the city. So I think it's a fair balance, and that doesn't create a real harm to any of our residents.
Absolutely, because unless you want to eliminate the requirement for a demolition permit, somebody's going to have to review those anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Todd has. I mean, Brian, I'm saying.
I'm Todd. He's Brian.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking it's actually Bill is the one who's looking at the demolition permit in the first place.
I'm
so
not
he's looking anyway. So it's just as he's looking at the permit, he looks at this. So.
No, are we staying in the same?
Sure, but I'll let Mark and David both had their hands up before me. That's fine. I'm in no hurry.
Okay. Mark and, well, Dana, I think was first, then Mark, we'll go to David then. Looking to move the conversation forward though, where we are. Dana, go ahead if you have a comment to make, unless it's been responded to and answered. And you're, still on mute.
So used to being in charge. Again, as most of those demolition delay intentions we get, it's just we take a look and it's over in 5 seconds. Todd and I, if something like my house comes up, that would be no big deal. But she has good points. So.
Okay, great. And let's move to Mark, because I want to keep moving the conversation forward, because we do have another topic on this, and mostly at this point, we're going to council.
I had something unrelated to what Nora said. I remembered my other question. One of the things that came up in one of our previous historical commission meetings, and we were talking about the delays, was what happens if we put a delay in place and then the property sold? Does the delay stay with the new property owner? Because we did lose 2 historic structures when the property sold, and there was a delay on those properties. The house on Butler Street and the straw factory. So those are just two examples. There were delays, property sold, the structures are destroyed. So I just want to see if there was something we could add
Wouldn't
with
the same process
verbiage.
apply? Wouldn't the same process apply to the new owner?
I don't know. That's what I'm asking.
The delay typically would follow the property, right?
I would think so.
It's not the owner, it's the property.
Yeah, that's what I think. All right, let's keep moving the conversation forward because Dana, if you would take down your hand, unless you have another question. I
Well, is
really.
that something that we could add because it's not in there?
I think that it passes with law. Let's keep our comments now. I appreciate that we have all of these Historic Society people with us. It's so kind of you guys to join, but we really should focus on council members' concerns right now to move the ordinance forward and move the agenda forward. So David and then Nora, and then we'll see if we can conclude the conversation.
Thanks, Chairperson Shanahan. Really, what we're doing is codifying something that ultimately they apply for a demolition permit. It goes through this 180 days flies by and the demolition can go forward. Correct? That's what's happening. So we're really just talking about the delay, and we have to be very careful applying it to Willow. None of this applies to Willow because they went in and knocked a building down with having done none of this and weren't permitted as contractors to be able to do a demolition and a lot of other things. So we have to be careful that we're equating here. I get Todd, the 50-year mark and the moving target and I totally understand. And I appreciate the work that everyone has done on this. I think it is important to look at these buildings, to look at these structures when it comes up. But in the long run, I think that, the owner of the property has to be allowed, if they follow and conform, to do what they would like to do at that point. And I think that's an important distinction that we need to keep thinking about. So that's all I want to say.
David, I'm not sure I follow. They can, of course, as I think you just said, if they wanted to wait it out. I mean, if somebody did put a demolition delay on it, doesn't stop them ultimately from tearing it down.
That's my point. After 180 days, they can still tear the property down, correct?
Right.
Yeah. So, we're really talking about a time factor. If someone wants to do it sooner, or there's a rush, I don't know. I don't know what all the reasons are. What I'm saying is that it's a process that we're trying to put into place and codify. And I get that. All of which is, when we compare to what happened on Willow, they went in without the right, they never applied for a demolition permit. They never looked at demolishing the building. They just demolished the building. And that's a whole different issue. So.
Completely. All right,
So
Nora.
just quickly on that. So part of it is the demolition delay, obviously, and the other part of this is the enforcement of somebody who violates this chapter or any portion of the state building code, because it's assimilated in. So in that regard, if somebody demolishes a building and they don't meet an exception to demolishing the building, you might not need a license to do it, but you certainly need a permit. And so if they violate it, then at least there's this enforcement penalty, which is increased a little bit. And it might make somebody think twice, maybe not, but it might make somebody think twice, especially if there's no end in sight.
So, Brian, if I'm understanding that, then if we use Willow as the example, they would then, for that action, be fined $250 for 180 days, or what did we come up with? 40-some thousand dollars. That would be.
It could be longer. There may not be.
I mean, without looking at it, my reaction to that is that if you violate this permitting process and you demolish a building, let's just call it building A. You demolish building A, you were supposed to get a permit, you didn't do it. The $250 fine is going to run, in my opinion, I want to double check this, past 180 days. It doesn't end at the 180 days, in my opinion, without getting a formal opinion to you guys. My feeling is it goes until the city is satisfied that there's been some kind of agreement between the demolisher of the building and the city that what they're doing is now acceptable to the city. And then the question is, are they going to pay a fine? If so, how much? And when can they stop that fine? But my feeling is it goes until there's an agreement with the city because the violator is the one who violated the statute, the ordinance in this regard. So that's the stick, I guess you want to call it the stick to try and prevent
How
people
does
from.
that link, just from the question then, how does it link to the referenced state statute? Does that jive with the state statute also, or? what you're saying?
So the state statute references many things. It talks about safety. It talks about many different things. And so General Statute 7-148, scope of municipal powers, one of the things that we're able to do is enforce a $250 a day penalty based on many things, but one of those things is public health and safety. And one of the sections of the state building code, I believe it's 408, but I could be wrong, it's in there, talks about when you're demolishing a building, you have to do certain things the right way. And one of them is erecting a fence and doing all these things and keeping people away from it by a certain distance. So if you violate that, it's a public health and safety thing. And so therefore we're able to institute this $250 fine.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great. So Ed, and then Nora, did you have another comment or are you good?
It's fine. I think I've made my points and I know we need to move on.
Yep.
Yeah, so very quickly, so I tend to agree with Nora, her overall, concerns about this thing. But specifically, my question is the 180 days, are we changing it from 120 to 180 because that's what most towns have? Or is there a reason to do it independent of the fact that other towns have the 6-month period as opposed to a 4-month period? Because we are adding an additional cost to people. The cost of demolishing something today is cheaper, presumably, and certainly now with inflation, as it is, than the cost of demolishing something 6 months from now. So we're adding a cost and a delay. The cost of construction after the demolition will increase, 6 months from now. So are we doing it simply and because apparently it has not been a burden thus far. So presumably keeping it at 180 days, we're not running up against a clock of any sort. Why is it that we're changing? Why is it that we're going to 180 when apparently we can do it all within 120 days?
Do you want to take that?
Yeah, thanks again, Tom. Part of the reason these delays are in place is as a deterrent. You want the owner of the property to think twice before they even get to this point. And the 180 days only comes in if there is an objection, which what was it, 4 in the last 5 years? 3 in the last 5 years. And now that we have this, and apparently that Bill Ireland can reverse a demolition delay on his own. I'm glad to see that we're going to be able to codify it here, I hope. Because one of the things that happened was the Butler Street building, and I put a delay on that building, and then Toll Brothers, who were the owners, wanted to move forward more quickly, and they worked with me. We made a deal to the building was still demolished, but they're now going to acknowledge the history of industry in the area in a permanent exhibit that's in a public place in the new building. So they were going to get to the end of 120 days and we're going to tear it down anyway. But the fact that they wanted to do it more quickly and the delay was in place gave them the incentive to come up with something that was better than just tearing it down, leaving a hole in the ground. So the deterrent and the length of time are both important in order to make this stuff work.
That's a little, in some ways, a little troubling because it's almost punitive in some ways, or it's almost like that extortion kind of thing where we're having someone cool their heels for 6 months just to get them to come to the bargaining table. I mean, that's the idea. That's the idea. But there's a determination made once the hole is put on. There's a determination made. There's a 1 or 2 person judge and jury at that point, because that hole is itself a determination that really has no recourse. There's no recourse in a way, right? It's really imposed to bring someone to the bargaining table.
But the whole point of it, besides the deterrent, the whole point of it is to give everybody enough time to try and save the building. If you can't save the building, since you can now, reverse the delay, you might find another way to mitigate. And mitigation is always a big part of preservation. Something that took me a long time to make peace with that. But this is mitigation, what we're talking about with Butler Street.
But
so even if there's mitigation, if there were no delay and if there were no incentive to somehow come to the table, it wouldn't happen.
Could there be a reason? Could there be a difference of opinion as to whether or not a building is worth preserving or is historical in some way or merits this kind of treatment? Would there be a difference in opinion on that?
Probably, but I mean, I would apply the National Register criteria.
Okay, so Tom, I think you said that you might have another question.
So Brian, a couple of questions have been raised. Leave aside the broader issues raised by Nora and I guess now Ed. If one of the things you said you'd look at was the enforcement, right? Look at the enforcement as well as look at the relationship between neglect and blight. Although I think that maybe that one was resolved. I'm not sure. Are those significant issues that would preclude us from going to public hearing if we wanted to do that, or something you should want to look at first? How do you view that? I don't know where the committee is first. I'm just curious about that.
I don't believe so. In terms of enforcement, you're talking about whether the violation, whether the penalty ends at 180 days or whether it continues until there's some kind of that the city finds it to be an acceptable.
Well, that part, yeah, but also, Ed, I think you'd asked about. You're asking about the process, or whether we need to put more in the process, Ed?
Yeah, I mean, unless there's I guess the only reason, the main reason that I heard for extending it from 120 to 180 is just to force people to negotiate, and I don't know that that's particularly satisfying, particularly since we're adding a significant cost to the homeowner or the property owner. And ultimately the decision as to whether or not the thing merits that level of consideration is up to, I guess, what, one or two people. I'm not sure what the process is for that. It's a little bit dicey when we're talking about specifically adding to a property owner's cost of doing business, basically, of owning a property and trying to improve or enhance it. I would like to have there, for instance, this entire ordinance is about the stick. I mean, I would like for there to be some consideration at some point. Maybe it's outside the scope of this committee, but maybe a carrot of some sort. Maybe it's and I don't want to get into the possibility, what that could entail, including a tax breaks. But I'm concerned about that we might be losing some perspective, at least the perspective of the property owner, in this, I wouldn't say rush, because it's not rushed, obviously, but in this effort to prevent what happened in Willow Street to happen again. And I think we might be, this approach might be a bit too aggressive.
Well, just I'm sorry to interrupt. I mean, just so you know that this was in the works long before Willow Street. And as I said at the beginning, it's not just Norwalk that has, looking at 180, Stanford and Westport already have it. They've deemed it appropriate in order to give them more room to preserve the properties. That's the basis for it. I mean,
so this is kind of market for, you would say,
yeah,
for our adjoining towns.
Yeah. Right. And again, Todd can say if it's not.
But this is the time, I'm not sure how long that 180 days have been in place, but we are in a faster world now. I mean, we can get things done pretty quickly, whereas we couldn't, 25 years ago. So I don't know why we're moving to the 180 other than this notion that we want to hold people's feet to the fire. because really things ought to be able to get done quicker now than they were 25 years ago. So 25 years ago, I could see maybe we need 6 months. I don't know that we need 6 months today. And the only reason that I've heard so far is to give us a bargaining, to give us time to make it so that people will, negotiate in good faith or something.
Right. I mean, that is the goal, right? To give more time to find a solution. And
but then you could go 9 months, right? You can go.
Actually, state law doesn't let you do that, but
all right.
So this is state law, right? I mean, state law provides for 180. So it's not unique to us. It's to give the relevant parties time to negotiate, to preserve properties for the benefit of the city. It hasn't been an issue.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a couple of properties, right? But it has not been a burden to date. And I think we have to keep that in mind. It has not been a burden to date.
Right. So 120 days has not been a burden or an issue to date as well, right?
I can ask Todd to answer that. I don't go back far enough.
So yeah, I mean, I don't really know. I mean, but I do know that that 93 East Avenue would not be standing at this moment had it not been for a delay, followed by a legal action and brought by the Attorney General. So there's a perfect example right there.
Nora, you've got another question, and then Josh.
Josh actually had his hand up before me.
Okay, great.
I mean, just to make it brief, I think that I am sympathetic to Ed's point only in the sense of saying delay without direction, I think is a problem. Automatically referring people to mediation, providing some sort of criteria by which, and I'm saying mediation, I don't know what the right term for this is. But I agree as written, it just says 180 days without actually directing people to do anything and just assuming that they're going to mediate. I also am not sure who's the mediator here. I'm not exactly sure if the cooling off period without actually requiring someone to do something in order to meet the goals that Todd you've stated here doesn't act like I don't see how you get from A to B. And I'm sort of convinced of two things. One, right now, I think I'm not willing. I don't think I can vote to take this to public hearing tonight. I just don't think it's ready at the moment. And I also I am sympathetic to Nora's concern specifically about the whether 50 years is the. I'm not exactly clear on how 50 years is the national standard. Sort of why 50 as opposed to it should be 50 if it's meritorious for some other reason. Maybe I haven't gotten a clear answer on that yet. Maybe I'm missing something. I don't know, but I'm iffy on a couple of the key, and I am wondering, as Brian and Tom have talked about, whether that 55(8) section needs to be fleshed out a little more. So that's kind of where I'm seeing it right now, but I don't think we're far away from this being ready.
Thank you. Nora?
And I would, we'll just sort of follow up on those to say, perhaps we could talk about, again, I very much understand national standards and state standards and wanting to align, but also, as everyone always likes to remind us, we're Norwalk, right? We're able to do things that work for our locality, and whether there might be some wiggle room here to try to do something that is more tailored, that acknowledges the fact that, we have different pressures and different community needs and different, quite frankly, histories of sort of building that might lean for something different. So I'd be very happy to sort of talk. I obviously will not be voting to move this forward. And so I'd be happy to talk about ways that maybe we could find something that would be more tailored, perhaps, that might meet some of the concerns that I've heard tonight. So thank you. I appreciate everyone's work on this. It is a very important issue, and I'd like to get something that works well for for all the competing needs in our community, including those of property owners.
So why don't we go back? I mean, we won't call for a vote. I mean, up to you, Madam Chair, and go back and look at some of these issues and come back next month.
Shall we make a motion to table this for next month's meeting?
Yeah, I'll move that.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
That is all of us. Great. Okay, so we'll move that forward and we'll rejoin this conversation next month. So our new business, and I'm very kindly, thank you, Jess and Sabrina, for waiting for this conversation. We're going to discuss the Arts and Cultural District proposal and approval process, as it will take an ordinance to set that up. So we'll turn the meeting over. Thanks, everybody from the commission.
Thank you to the Historical Commission members for showing up and providing your guidance and experience. Thank you. It's appreciated.
Really appreciate it. And thank you to Sabrina and Jess for waiting for us to have that very technical conversation. So turning it over to you guys.
No worries at all. And I'll try to make this as quick and painless as possible. I know a lot of you have heard this already, but for those of you who haven't, I'll give the presentation that I did at the Economic Community Development Committee meeting. And I will also address Diane Loricella's questions, hopefully in the presentation, but if not, I can answer it more directly as well. So just the quick table of contents. Can you all see this? Yes? No?
I'll share it, Sabrina. Hold on one second.
Okay, I can also share it.
I got it. Hold on. This way, you're doing one thing. Hold on one second. Share screen.
It's okay. If
You got it? Okay, good.
Yeah, I could, so I don't have to say like next slide and stuff. It's just easier.
Great.
So we'll go through the goal, the current model that we have for the current commission, the proposed model for the Arts and Cultural Commission. I'll compare the two and touch on the geography a little bit, and then kind of the role that the Ordinance Committee and the Economic Community Development Committee and the Council plays in all of this. So our goal is dragged right from the POCD. It really focuses on preserving and promoting and creating an arts and cultural history in Norwalk and Arts and Cultural District, which includes an arts and cultural plan, as well as an arts inventory, which both have been requests in the past and will be in the future for the capital budget request. So all of these are kind of aligning with the POCD, and that's chapter 6, and it's one of those goals in there. So what we currently have is we have 11 members. 2 of the sitting members are council members, and then we have 9 residents that serve for varying terms, some for 1 year, some for 2 years, and some for 3 years. They oversee the citywide art initiatives that we have in the city that just started ramping up this year and last year, and then also additionally serve as stewards for the public art collection. So they currently have an ordinance in place that guides their responsibilities, but they have a set of bylaws that are created by the individual group that specifically gives kind of rules and regulations of how the commission should be run as well. So our proposed model is a little bit different, but similar in a lot of ways. And it's really just to mirror what the Arts and Cultural District Ordinance requires at the state level. So it's 9 members instead of the 11, but again, this is a minimum. We can, play with this number as we want. 6 of those members have to be active in the arts and cultural community of Norwalk. So it has to be either a board member, somebody who is an actual artist, somebody who is an arts administrator, any of those combination of things. And they don't have to be residents, but they can be. What we've seen in the past is that we're being barred from asking people like, the overseer of the Norwalk Art Space is not a Norwalk resident, but super influential institution for the arts in Norwalk. So the fact that we can't even request to have him on the board at this current moment is really not working as best as it could to bring of our partners to the table for the commission. Additionally, 3 of those members do have to be residents. Again, these are the basis numbers that are in the ordinance. We can have more, but those are kind of what we need to meet to comply. In this specific model, the cultural district aspect of the Arts and Cultural Commission will specifically focus on the urban core geography or whatever geography we so deem necessary to be the Arts and Cultural District. The main purpose of this is that it manages this specific district, and we are allowed to raise additional funding for this district. So in the current model, they act as any other board or commission where we have an operating budget and a capital budget. However, we're not, as city stewards, we're not out asking for funds. We are getting grants and are allowed to do that currently, but we're not really raising any capital funds or applying for state grants that are specifically for arts and cultural districts because we don't have one in place at the moment. So this is just a comparison of the two things of what I just went over. So the biggest difference is really that we can apply for grants and get donations for the specific district to implement arts events, arts installations, all of that fun stuff. And also the change of the members, which will allow non-residents, but again, they can be residents as well, to join the commission and to serve on the commission. So what we have in place now is just a city ordinance. So this is really just going to be an amendment to this ordinance, or a large amendment to the ordinance, and also following that state legislation that was released so that we check off the boxes. So this is the proposed geography in a more zoomed in level. I'm sure you all know this, of the enterprise zone district. That's just South Norwalk and then Wall Street above it. Again, this is just the proposed geography. This can be altered, this can be tweaked. There can be other cultural districts throughout the city. We would just have to include that on a map and give a tour of that when we go for the submission. So this is just the steps to implement the proposed model. So after we have these meetings with support from council and the mayor's office, we would then have to submit a letter of intent to the Fairfield County Cultural Alliance. They act as the conduit of information to the state's office to get these up and running and certified. We would then have to take the geography itself to get ratified so that we know the exact boundaries of the district. That has to be included within our application with our areas of cultural importance marked on them as well. We would then have to get a ordinance amended and passed through the Ordinance Committee to establish the Cultural District Commission and give its laws and regulations to that, as you would for any other commission that currently exists. Have a public hearing on that, and then that's required not only for an ordinance as it always is, but also for the cultural district legislation as well. We're required to have at least one public meeting to establish it, so that would count for both. And then we would have to go to council for the submission of the whole package to the state legislature, and DECD would then come down and visit our cultural district and then give us the last final stamp. And that's when we would be able to appoint our members and really get the ball rolling. So that is all I have. And I know I talked really fast because I wanted to be respectful of all of your time, but I am happy to answer questions if you have any.
Mr. Livingston.
Thank you. Sabrina, I think it's a really neat idea. I guess my question is, we currently have the Arts Commission that, in theory, is arts for the whole city.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens if we're only focusing on the one district? What happens to the rest of the city?
So it would be both, which is why it's not just the cultural district itself, which the legislation calls for. It's the arts and cultural district. So the cultural commission, the Arts and Cultural Commission will hyper focus on raising funds specifically for events and arts installations in that specific geography. But the larger projects that we have on the city level as of right now that we do through our capital funds, our operating funds, that would all remain the same. It would just be hyper focused in that one specific geography with this change.
Okay, I got you, thanks. Now, and I may have missed you saying this, do we have to have people from outside the city, or you just think there are people that would be nice to have?
We have to have folks that are involved in the arts community. Those can be residents or non-residents. They just have to be somebody that's specifically involved in the arts community in Norwalk. So they can be a board member of an arts institution. They can be an artist themselves, which a majority of our commissioners at this point in time are related in some way, shape, or form. So I don't really think that's going to be a super hard criteria to meet for us. But there are people that we were hoping to get on the commission that we can't because they are not residents. So like Five Fingers, for example, is not a resident, but very prominent artist in Norwalk. So those types of folks, we would be able to do that. But again, there's no requirement that they're not citizens. It's just that they have to be specifically in the arts community.
And would you want that to be I would not want to have a commission made up entirely of non-residents. I mean, so are you thinking like 3 is what you like? No more than 3 could be out of district or something like that?
It's really up to what you guys think is best, but that would be a fair number. I think when we had come up with a list of proposed members at this point in time, there are about 2 of them out of like the 12 that we had on that list that were actually non-residents.
Gotcha. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Ubelman?
Thank you, Chairperson Shanahan. I have a question about the whole soliciting grant funding. Are there any issues statutorily with state of Connecticut to have a municipal board or commission that is also soliciting funds?
No, so at the current moment, we can solicit grant funds, so we can apply for grants as the commission. So it acts as, the city of Norwalk doing business as kind of the Arts Commission, and we can apply for grants that way as staff. Because we would be overseeing the funds as a commission, not necessarily directly the city. However, we cannot go seek donations and contributions as a commission at this point in time. So we can't go to, random John Smith and say, hey, we're doing this mural across the street from you guys, and we think it'd be really great for your business. Do you want to support it in some way, shape, or form? We're not doing that right now.
Right now, we're not, but what we're looking to is statutorily make a change to be able to do that.
Correct.
Okay. And that, I guess, is my question from a state, just that we're putting the right mechanism in place when we
so that's
the ordinance.
Yeah, that's the major difference. So we can apply for grants right now. That's not an issue as the municipality can. As a municipality, we can do that. But we cannot go and ask, a neighbor to say if they are interested in supporting something that we have going on at this moment.
Okay, thank you. I'm in support of this. I think it's a great idea. I think we should definitely tear into this and make it happen. So
awesome, thank you.
Nora?
So just, I'm certainly in favor of this. Just to follow up on David's comments. So we are able to reform this commission in order to be able to solicit donations because of the state enabling statute for cultural district, correct?
That is 100% correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there other areas where we could start looking at this for, Parks and Rec, for other places where we are in dire need of contributions and the ability to do something? Or is this the only sort of current state enabling statute on the books?
I don't know the answer to that as of the only one I'm familiar with is the one that just came out for the cultural district. However, the cultural district does cover a variety of not just, statues and murals, but more events and music and theater and things that things people might not think of or be able to donate to automatically. So we can probably use this statute for some of those things if we think a little bit creatively about the enabling legislation. But for, something specifically to do improvements to parks or things of that nature, I'm not sure if any of those exist.
Okay. And that obviously is a little beyond the scope, but I'm very excited about this concept. It seems like a great opportunity for us since revenues are always our challenge. So fabulous. Thank you for bringing this to us.
Of course. Anytime. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you very much. I think our theory is that the Economic Committee is going to look at where the cultural, where it's going to exist, what the geography of it is, and we'll work on the ordinance to make that happen. And we're going to try to do it parallel so that they're both moving together at the same time to get this in place sooner rather than later. So that's the plan. Great. So thank you so much. And we'll start working on that soon. We'll put together a small committee on it. So thank you.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Sabrina.
Thank
Thanks,
you, guys.
Jessica.
Thank you.
So I've come to the end of my agenda. Is there anything else that committee members have that they'd like to raise? Hearing none, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Goldstein. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everybody, for coming tonight.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Welcome.
Talk soon.
Ed, welcome. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you.
All right.